It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the silence that follows when something alive is suddenly gone. For years, the creek behind my house had been a quiet companion, a trickling reminder that nature still had a place in a neighborhood obsessed with beige fences and clipped hedges. I fell asleep to it every night, its murmur threading through the dark like a lullaby. I woke to it every morning, the glint of water catching the first slice of sunrise. It was more than a stream. It was a piece of memory, a piece of me. And then one morning it was gone, smothered under a mountain of gravel, suffocated by a woman who believed she could bend nature to the rules written on her clipboard. Karen, our HOA president, our self-proclaimed guardian of order. And in trying to bury my creek, she had buried the lifeline of her own empire to me. That creek was simple. It cooled the air in summer. It nourished the grass when sprinklers sputtered. It carried echoes of my childhood, when my father would take me out to the stream near our old house and teach me how to skip rocks until my wrist throbbed. When I bought this property, that ribbon of water felt like a promise. It didn't care about rules or property lines. It just flowed. But to Karen, it was chaos, a flaw, an eyesore in her kingdom of uniformity. She hated the way it cut across the map, a free and untamed thing she couldn't regulate with bylaws. She said it lowered the neighborhood's tone, that it was unsafe, that it made property values drop. I thought she was exaggerating, until the day she declared war. It began with whispers at barbecues. "That creek looks messy," she'd say, balancing a plate of potato salad while smiling sharp enough to cut glass. I laughed the first time. "Karen, it's a creek. It's been here longer than your HOA." She didn't laugh back. Her lips pressed tight, her eyes narrowed. And then came the letters. Official envelopes with the HOA logo stamped in the corner. Safety hazard, environmental concern, mosquito breeding ground, auditory disturbance. I kept them all, filed in a red folder that became my shield. The first time I saw Karen peering over my fence with 2 board members at her side, pointing at floating leaves like a detective at a crime scene, I knew this was no longer about appearances. This was about control. Karen lived for control. She had been HOA president for 7 years, longer than most politicians last in office, and she ruled like one. She weaponized bylaws, bullied neighbors into silence, and carried her clipboard like it was a crown. "The HOA always wins," she whispered once as she trespassed into my backyard, as if it were an incantation. I wanted to believe it was laughable, but the way she said it chilled me, because I knew she believed it. I went to the next HOA meeting prepared. A cafeteria transformed into a courtroom under fluorescent lights. Karen stood at the podium, her slideshow projecting images that looked suspiciously pulled from Google: stock mosquitoes, children by rivers that weren't ours, a blurry photo of my creek after a rainstorm captioned hazard. Her voice trembled just enough to sound noble. "We cannot risk the safety of our families." A man in a neon vest with the word operations stitched where his name should be nodded gravely beside her. She called it beautification. I called it burial. I raised my hand. "Do you have permits? Environmental reviews? County authorization?" The room shifted. Karen avoided my eyes. "We are in consultation," she said, which I translated as, "We have nothing." But fear beats facts. A board member made a motion, another seconded. Hands rose like soldiers saluting. The motion carried. The creek was doomed. 3 mornings later I woke to the growl of diesel and the beeping of machinery reversing. I ran to the window, toothbrush still foaming in my mouth, and saw them. Bulldozers, dump trucks, cones marking my property like a battlefield. Neighbors gathered on lawns, some cheering, some silent. And at the center of it all, perched in a neon safety vest with her clipboard raised like a scepter, was Karen, the queen of beige, ready for her conquest. I stormed outside, shouting over the machinery, "You don't have permits. You don't have authority. This is my property." Karen smiled and flipped through her papers. "Section 7.2, she called out. "HOA jurisdiction." The vote passed. "We're beautifying." The bulldozer operator hesitated. I caught his eyes, saw doubt flicker, but Karen slapped the side of the machine. "Keep going. You're authorized." First cascade of gravel hit the water with a sound like thunder. The creek gurgled in protest, fish flopping helplessly as brown froth rose. I felt something die in my chest. "Stop," I screamed, pulling out my phone. "This is illegal. I'm documenting every face, every shovel. You're liable." Karen leaned into my shot, grinning. "Go ahead, post it online. The board stands by me." Another dump truck tilted, another avalanche. Within an hour, the creek was gone. The sound I'd lived with for years silenced in minutes. And as Karen stood in the middle of the grave she'd created, spreading her arms as if she'd achieved victory, I realized something she didn't. She hadn't killed my creek. She had severed her own empire's water supply, and water never forgives. The silence that night was unbearable. No frogs, no crickets, no running water, just the hum of distant sprinklers trying to replace what nature once gave for free. By morning, the first signs of collapse appeared. My neighbor Mr. Howard stood over his roses, garden hose limp in his hand. "Pressure's low," he muttered. A Facebook post followed. "Anyone else's sprinklers not working?" Replies poured in. Lawns yellowing, pools cloudy, fountains sputtering. And yet Karen sent an email blast. Minor water interruptions. The board is handling it. Handling it like a captain smiling on a sinking ship. I watched the neighborhood dry up. Lawns once emerald turned brittle. The community fountain coughed itself into silence. Kids climbing inside like it was a sandbox. Karen, of course, organized a brunch to celebrate beautification. She stood in front of a banner that read HOA Success, sunglasses perched like a crown. Posing on the gravel bed where fish had suffocated, she posted photos online, hashtags dripping with praise from her loyalists. But behind the scenes the cracks were spreading. The city sent a letter. Water usage had spiked dangerously since the creek's burial. Fines were coming, and I had the letter in my red folder. The next HOA meeting was packed. Voices rose. Angry now, no longer whispers. My water bill tripled. My garden's dead. Karen tried to smile, but sweat gleamed at her temples. Remain calm, she pleaded. I stood, raising the city's letter high. Funny, I said, because the city doesn't think you're handling it at all. Gasps rippled. Karen froze, her mouth working without sound. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. But I wasn't finished. I went to the courthouse, spent hours in dusty archives, flipping through plats and surveys until I found it. Proof. That creek wasn't just a natural stream. It was engineered into the subdivision's stormwater management system, feeding the retention pond, which in turn fed the HOA's irrigation pumps. The creek was the artery. By burying it, Karen had cut off her own heart. I copied everything, stamped and signed, stuffed it into my red folder. Timing, I knew, was everything. Weeks passed. The neighborhood decayed. Tanker trucks lined the streets, hoses snaking across lawns. Assessments rose. Fees piled. Neighbors grumbled, anger rising like heat from asphalt. At the emergency meeting, Karen stood at the podium, trying for cheerful. We have secured a contractor, she announced, to restore normalcy. A voice shouted, who's paying for it? Another joined. Louder, we already paid. You buried the creek. The room erupted. I waited, then walked forward, laying the stamped county maps on the table. This is your irrigation system, I said. And this, I tapped the bold line marking the creek, was its lifeline. You killed it. Chaos. Neighbors shouting. Karen screaming lies. Over the roar. But the board members saw the stamps. One muttered, he's right. Another whispered, we're liable. Karen slammed her palm down. The HOA always wins, but no one believed it anymore. The vote came swiftly. A motion to remove her as president. Seconds rang out like gavel strikes. Hands raised. Unanimous. Karen stood, frozen, trembling. Her voice cracked. You ungrateful fools. You'd be nothing without me. But no one moved aside when she stormed out. The queen was dethroned. Days later, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. The once mighty ruler of the cul-de-sac reduced to a bitter footnote. The board, desperate to salvage the neighborhood, hired bulldozers again, this time to dig up gravel, to free the water they'd tried to strangle. I stood at the edge of my yard as the first trickle returned, dark ribbons sliding between stones, whispering back to life. When the fountain sputtered awake days later, spraying arcs of water under the sun, children laughed, lawns revived, flowers lifted their heads. And when a reimbursement check arrived in my mailbox, signed from the HOA's discretionary budget, I smiled. It wasn't about the money, it was proof. That night I sat by the reborn creek, dipping my hand into its current. It slid smooth and cold over my fingers. I thought of Karen, wherever she'd gone, perhaps searching for a new neighborhood to rule, clipboard in hand. I almost felt sorry, but then I remembered her standing in the gravel bed, declaring, now this is beauty, as fish died at her feet. I remembered her shouting, the HOA always wins. And I whispered into the dark, listening to the water gurgle back, not anymore, because the truth is simple. You can bury a creek, but you can't stop water. You can bury the truth, but it always finds its way back. Patience beats arrogance. Paperwork beats lies. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't fighting fire with fire. It's letting arrogance collapse under its own weight. Like gravel sinking into the current it tried to smother. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't underestimate the quiet, steady things. Water, truth, patience. They'll outlast every Karen, every clipboard, every false crown, always. And if you've watched this far, drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Because this isn't just my story. It's every neighbor's story who's ever stood against arrogance disguised as order. Subscribe for the next HOA nightmare, because trust me, there's always another Karen waiting with a clipboard. Sometimes when I walk past that creek now, I notice how the water doesn't just flow, it shines. It carries no grudges, no speeches, no rules. It just moves forward, as if reminding me that nature doesn't need permission slips. The neighborhood has changed too. People talk more, they wave more, they even question more. Fear has been replaced by something stronger, memory. Everyone remembers how one clipboard nearly strangled the whole community, and how the truth, patient and quiet, brought it back to life. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not just that Karen fell, Not just that lawns turned green again, but that an entire neighborhood saw with their own eyes how fragile control can be when it's built on lies. Because when the water returned, so did something else. Trust. And that's a current no HOA, no bylaw, and no clipboard queen can ever dam.